Sure. Okay, so hello everyone, my dear audience, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Anam, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for today. I am a student of English Literature and Linguistics in UW. The special thing that I am going to tell you about is that you all are not going to bear just two random people talking. Rather, I've got a team of six with me, and they are all, I would say, creative, talkative, and humble as well. So also includes professors. They are also teachers and students with me. So there is quite diversity here. You're all going to see now. Um, Furthermore, it was all possible because of our past organization, which is an independent and non-profit association. They are Professors Association for Student Services, and their aim is to normalize the critical thinking among students and teachers as well through workshops, through webinars, and through our people who are ready to share their knowledge. And we all are here to hear them to our open minds and open hearts. So we are very happy to gather you all in our learning adventure today, and we will explore how argumentation works. We will explore that how we can master our emotional self. You know, we humans live on surface most of the times. We make opinions about others that is very easy to convince ourselves mostly. So, in order to understand all of these emotional, I would say, dramas in our life, I have a very special guest from dedicated yet amiable guest from United Kingdom, Mr. Stuart Hanscom. He's a senior lecturer at University of Glasgow, and he has his expertise in philosophy, psychology, communication, critical thinking, and also wrote his PhD on existentialism. And he has also impactful books written on critical thinking that is very famous here as well. And he also wrote many articles as well. So let's move towards Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, let me tell you, well, I was planning to tell them all about you, but I kind of made you a mysterious man as well. So let's start, if you say.
Sure. Yes. Thanks, Alan, for that introduction. Thanks for inviting me to do this talk. So it's about, the title I've given you is to do with critical thinking and its relationship to emotional intelligence. The general background is I'm working on, I've just started working on the second edition of the critical thinking textbook, if that's what you call it, Critical Thinking, the Basics. So the first edition came out in 2016. And I've been asked to do a second edition, which is due out it'll be 2023. So I'm started working on it this summer. Most of the work will go on next summer, and then I'll submit it by in about a year's time. And so they obviously, there's various corrections that you can make and things that I wasn't entirely happy with the first edition, that there's an opportunity to change and improve. And always good to get in a new chapter for a second edition of a book as well. And the one I thought long and hard about what to do in this respect, and ended up coming down on the thing I most want to do is put in a chapter on emotions and its relationship to critical thinking. So hence the question at the top of that slide. So why include a chapter on emotions in a critical thinking book? In fact, I don't think I know of a single critical thinking textbook that has a chapter dedicated to emotions, or when I say critical thinking textbook, I include books on informal logic, argumentation, that general area. In order to, I've more or less got the chapter written, or a first draft of it written, and I'm reasonably happy with it, but I've got a couple of question marks. You may be able to offer some sort of feedback or sort of the views on the things I've got question marks over, or on anything else, of course, as well, that I talk about. In order to go about answering the question of why include such a chapter, though, I'll explain the take I have on critical thinking, which is very much in evidence in critical thinking, the basics, and it's not it's a funny subject area. It is the domain of philosophers to a great extent, but it's also been taken up by people interested in academic literacy, and the past setup seems to be along those kinds of lines. Do ask me questions about this at the end if you want to. I've got some fairly sort of strong views and maybe slightly controversial views on what I see as the role or how critical thinking is taught, if you like, as an attempt to improve academic literacy. And I'd also be interested to hear anything more you wanted to say about what your aims are, if you like, in this particular society. So I'll talk about that, but mostly I will talk about emotions in terms of its relationship or their relationship to rationality. If there's time, I'll say something about dual process theory, which has a strong connection to emotion. Although that does raise another question, but whether I've already got, the first chapter of the book talks about dual process theory. Do I need to talk about it more in this chapter, or should the new things I've found out about it, do they go somewhere else? This idea of an argument form called an appeal to emotion, which you do find in some textbooks, not many, but you do find in some. I'll talk about that and what my view is on that, and how to deal with it. And at the end, I'll say something about the relationship between emotion and dialogue, because I see dialogue as being very important for an understanding of critical thinking, and how it should be taught and how it should be contextualized. Yeah, just a bit more information about me. I've been teaching critical thinking courses for a long time now, for about 12 or 13 years. And it's usually not to philosophy students. Where I work, we've got a lot of people doing education, people doing environmental science, people doing health and social policy. And so it's students from these kinds of areas that end up taking these courses. So I've been forced into a situation, but it would come very naturally to me anyway, where I want to make whatever I teach as relevant as possible. So things that they can find relevant to their degree studies to some extent, but where I find this kind of teaching works best is all the time it's oriented towards decision-making, being more rational in any number of contexts. So it could be professional context, it could be a civic context to do with voting and that sort of thing, an interpersonal context to do with relationships, friendships, all areas in which there's going to be exchanges of views, disagreements, where that is vitally important to healthy working relationships and so on, but is easy to get wrong as well. So the critical thinking, the basics book is as much aimed at, from my point of view, I don't know if Routledge look at it this way, but from my point of view, is as much aiming at lay people, at non-students, at people who want to find out more about the subject and believe it can make a difference to how they go about running meetings or engaging with colleagues and so on, as much as anything else.
So, Mr. Stewart, means
Yeah.
you have a lot of diversity of minds and perspective when you were teaching philosophy to others. And I think your book is tremendously, amazingly written. And whoever reads it, they have, they agree to your point through their own perspective as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yes.
If I understand what you just said, Adam, then yeah, that's very much what I'm saying. Yeah. What the best audience I have, I think, for this teaching is a postgraduate course I run called Critical Thinking and Communication. It could be taken by people doing any of, we've got multiple postgraduate degrees here. It could be taken by any of them, but it's particularly aimed at teachers already in the profession who are looking to get a master's degree or a further higher degree. And this is one of the courses that contributes to that degree. So my point is, most of what I say, they should recognize. They just haven't given it a name, they haven't thought about it deeply, and they haven't thought about, well, various other issues around it, problem solving, what to do about this, if you like. So that in many ways is my perfect audience. And that's, I mean, when I teach this stuff at undergraduate level, it seems to be received pretty well. But it's for me, the most satisfying is where I am working with their experience of the world, and I'm shining a light on it in a way that they immediately go, yes, right, I get that, I can see that, it's helpful. These are questions I've half formulated, you formulated them for me, we can now, and then they're able to make progress with it. But I mean,
Yeah. I can think, like, I can imagine that people with so much knowledge are sitting calmly together and discussing about philosophy.
Sorry, to say that again.
Yes, I'm saying that I can't imagine that if a people you are talking about that they are graduated and they are at high levels in their knowledge. So when they are all together, they have a lot of knowledge and passion. So how they can calm themselves in talking about all of these things? That's quite difficult to imagine.
Well, my sessions are fairly structured, so hopefully it's not. But it's the time does fly by. That's for sure. Yeah, there's if I wanted to just kind of let them talk and share these experiences, it would we have to manage time quite carefully.
It's all right. We are here to listen to your world, and we are here to enter your world. You know, it's amazing for us. We different cultures, but we are keen to curious about each other's. And I assumed your name as well. You know, when I was looking up for you and discovering about you, the first thing that took my sight was your name, Stuart. And and the question came that is Scottish Gaelic is still is still common there. There are speakers of Scottish Gaelic there.
Oh, it's a bit like the Glasgow building question. I'm not the person to ask. I'm actually English. And I just happen to have a Scottish name. Gaelic speaking, yes, absolutely, it's encouraged. All kids have to learn it at school. And in the Highlands, in the Hebrides, for example, I think it is spoken by some people as a first language, but you don't, on the whole, in the lowlands, especially where we are, and in places like Glasgow and Edinburgh, you don't hear too much of it. But it's definitely,
right, I understand.
It's being kept alive. It is being encouraged for sure. Yeah.
That's all right. I understand that.
So this slide is I've kind of said all of this, haven't I? Really. I mean, what other textbooks tend to do with this is with emotions. Is if you look in the index, you'll find usually quite a few entries talking about emotions, but they're normally sort of dealt with when they're talking about rhetoric or persuasive communication that tends to undermine or at least replace argumentation or a real commitment to trying to get to the truth through argumentation or get to agreement through argumentation. So emotions are usually set up as something that gets in the way of reaching agreement or gets in the way of reaching truth. Sometimes formulated, as I said, as an argument which is understood as an appeal to an emotion, which I'll talk more about later. More often, it is seen as a kind of rhetorical ploy, often linguistically related. So people will talk about emotionally forceful language or emotionally charged language, the use of absolutes, words which they know will have a particular emotional impact on their audience, words like dangerous and what have you. So it's often it finds its way in these sorts of ways, but is rarely, if ever, treated systematically in the way that I'm trying to do it here. In the first edition of the book, there's about 7 pages on it at the end of the first chapter, which talks about cognitive biases, heuristics, the meaning of rationality, that sort of thing. So basically, I'm taking those 7 pages and I'm expanding it into a full chapter, which, as you can imagine, has got too long as things sit. A slightly embarrassing thing that came up I went over that they wanted like 60,000 words for the first edition. I gave them
Yeah, that's
I gave them well over 70,000. In fact, I gave them nearly 80,000, and kind of snuck it through. But I mean,
we artists do needs creative freedom. We care for
right.
it a lot.
And then the contract comes through and it says we want the limit 75,000 words. I said, well, it's already 80,000 words. Okay, okay, right. Well, we'll let you have 85. The truth is, it's closer to 83,000 words. So I've got 2,000 words to play with. I'm going to have to do a lot of trimming. Anyhow, this chapter's going in, whatever the case. I had another chapter in mind, but that obviously isn't going to go in now. So so in order to expand on those 7 pages, to allow for a more systematic treatment of emotions within the book, my approach to critical thinking falls under these 4 headings. At the heart of it, and this is very normal for this area, is arguments. Just the whole idea of an argument in terms of premises and a conclusion. There's lack of agreement over an issue. You've got a point of view, you give reasons in support of that point of view. This kind of interaction is at the heart of critical thinking. So an analysis of arguments, argument identification, reconstruction, evaluation, discussion of fallacies, typical errors we make in reasoning has to be, if critical thinking is anything for me, it's that. It's and this is normally how it's viewed by the kind of textbooks that I'm aware of. Where I am slightly different, but again, this is becoming more common, is this underlying psychology. So particularly interesting cognitive biases, things that if there's typical errors of reasoning that we make, forms of poor argument that we put forward and accept from others as well, and well-known fallacies, then why those ones? So there's quite a keen connection between fallacies, which used to be just studied by philosophers with no reference to psychology at all. But as I spotted, and many others are spotting, there's clearly a link between the kind of cognitive biases that we have, things like the confirmation bias and self-serving bias, and a whole set of these, which I outline in the first chapter of the book, which explain why we are so prone to making errors in our thinking, and the particular kinds of errors that we make as well. And this is related to this thing called dual process theory, which I may say a bit more about later on. But again, the now thoroughly well accepted idea that our cognitive processing, our engagement with the world on most fronts, works at 2 levels: a quick and automatic level that again is often emotionally driven or affect driven as well, and then the rational mind, or the rational system, where it's more deliberative, it's slower. It's where we feel we are bringing concentrated attention to a particular subject area or question, and so the quick system, or system 1, is quite a lot is known about it. It works on the basis of heuristic functioning. It's shot through with various biases and shortcuts that it makes, and we know quite a lot about these now. Yes. So this is all the stuff that I think is important to know about, to give a kind of richness and depth and self-understanding as well, which for me is vitally important. Again, I for reasons which I can discuss later, I'm not entirely convinced that teaching critical thinking will make that much difference to people's academic performance. But what I think it can do is make a big difference to our relationship to ourselves. I think in terms of self-knowledge, in terms of development of intellectual virtues, this sort of thing. I think for me, this is where it's most potent or most effective as a form of learning, encouraging self-reflection in these sorts of ways. And therefore, understanding these, the dual process theory is a thing, understanding the contents, if you like, of the unconscious mind, or system 1 processing, is important from an objective point of view in terms of how reasoning works, but also important in terms of our self-understanding as well.
So means that we have to recognize our deep-rooted irrationality in order to find our blind spot, and that's what we have to do in order to have the our academic critical thinking to enhance as well.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
Yes,
very nicely put. Yes, yeah.
that's
Third then
amazing.
is dispositions, or we could call them types of virtue. I mean, character traits which, character traits which enable critical thinking, which enable us to be more reasonable. And there's
Yeah,
a
got it. Yes.
long list of these, to do with open-mindedness, self-knowledge, humility, and a way of properly recognizing our limitations, I suppose. There is a strong tendency towards being overconfident, confirmation bias, only paying attention to the aspects of the world that uphold our existing ideas, these sorts of things. So if you've got, if knowledge of this matters to a certain extent, but the more deeply rooted this is in your personality traits, in your
Yes.
habitual engagement with the world, then the more effective you will be, if you like, in being vigilant, alive to possible errors and sort of poor
Mhm.
thinking. And then the fourth is constructive dialogue. So if you're going to change someone's mind, and if you're going to be properly challenged, we're not very good at challenging ourselves on the whole, but we are quite capable of challenging each other. So
Yes.
in order to be, first of all, you've got to be open to this possibility, and that goes along with dispositions.
Mm.
But there's also a set of skills and tendencies and attributes which all feed into the ability to hold a constructive dialogue. Most of them are pretty common sense, but they're still important to remind ourselves of and to know about. So in my teaching, particularly in critical thinking communication, there's an undergraduate course I do called Communication, Influence and Leadership as well, which pays an awful lot of attention to what a constructive dialogue should look like and all the many ways in which they can go wrong, including just simple stuff around listening and just how bad we are at listening and how to improve upon that. Different types of listening, for example. So my approach is quite holistic. And in all of these, emotions in one way or another are relevant to all those four categories. So my thinking is then, if I'm going to get in a chapter on emotions, it needs to be early in the book. So the place for it would be after chapter 1. So chapter 1 will still be primarily about rationality, cognitive biases, all that stuff. The emotions bit used to be there. It's now going to be the next chapter and developed in the ways that I will talk about here. And I've already said something about. I'll just say something about the nature of emotions. I mean, one of the reasons I suspect critical thinking books haven't gone there in a systematic way is that they're a pretty scary area. It's daunting. There's a huge amount of research on them over the last few decades, certainly. Psychology tended to, because it was trying to be ultra objective and behaviorist, sort of in the middle part of the 20th century, there was less research going on into things like emotional experience, but that has changed enormously, and there's so much interest now, especially in the link between cognition and emotion. So it can rapidly become off-putting, sort of like, if you're someone who's been trained as a philosopher or even in communication, you're going to think, well, you can start to sort of, look at this literature and think, well, who am I to start making sort of, I can't even draw some assumptions out of this. I'm in the lucky position of having studied, one of the other courses I teach is to do with moral psychology. It's called Human Nature and Wellbeing, for what it's worth. It's not a great title, but it kind of will do. But I talk about theoretical psychology and schools of thought in psychology, and there's a big section there on emotions. And I've been interested in emotions quite aside from critical thinking, all the rest of it. I've been interested in emotions as a subject matter for a couple of decades. So I'm comfortable with it. I think I know the kinds of theories. I think I can find my way through them. I think I can offer a decent, plausible account, and also an account that will be understandable to most people as well. In other words, if we're trying to explain emotions, does this accord with your experience, even if you might not have thought about them in just that way and in that amount of depth? Again, I would expect people to go, yeah, okay, if this is radically out with how you experience emotions, then it's not a theory you're likely to engage with. Or if you give just, if you like, a neurological account of them, it's going to be relatively meaningless to anyone who is trying to understand an emotional experience, what it is to be angry, what causes anger, the effects that has on your perception and your judgment, the effects it has on your behavior, the effects it has on other people, and so on and so on. That's what's interesting for most of us. And so a theory needs to be able to make sense, if you like, of everyday experience in that way. So, I mean, they're a tricky category in as much like any, as most of you are going to know, you try to categorize anything, it becomes tricky pretty quickly. The mind isn't going to allow us to neatly partition it, but it's achievable enough. I mean, there are some clear differences between, for the most part, a prototypical example of an emotion is different from a mood, is different from sensations, is different from desires. They are. I mean, the word affect I put in there partly to remind myself to mention it. It's a useful word, but it's not always that clearly defined. But most definitions will understand affect as being, it means feeling, but it encompasses all different varieties of feeling. So mood, sensations, desires, emotions as well. What I'll say later on about the rationality of emotions, emotional intelligence, is that affect or feeling is actually is very important, because when people are suspicious of emotions or suspicious of feelings, it's like, well, can we trust what we feel? And that's what I'm going to say something about. And that feeling isn't necessarily, it could be more like a mood or just a hunch or an intuition. It's not obviously categorized as an emotion, but it's still in the ballpark, in as much as it is the way it's different from a thought, because it is a feeling, right? So the first thing I'm going to say in terms of defining emotions is there a type of feeling? Right? Someone can challenge me on that if you like, but I'm going to stick to that one. It's a type. If it's anything, it's a type of feeling, and it's a type of feeling that has typically a cognitive element as well. In other words, it's a feeling that's about something. You're afraid of this, you're angry about that, you're frustrated because of that, you're in love with that particular person, you are jealous of that particular person or of this particular event, you're envious of this particular quality or characteristic, you're guilty because of what you did, you feel ashamed because of who you are, blah, 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 right? So it's nearly all theories will accept that a fairly central core characteristic of what makes a particular feeling count as an emotion is it's about something. So there is there's a belief that sits behind it. And it's a belief that causes you to feel a certain way about a set of events. And because of that, it's conceptually linked to desires as well. If we didn't care about stuff, I don't think we'd have emotions. So we need to be bothered by the world. There needs to be things that can go well and not go well. And and there's a whole variety of ways in which they can go well. There's an enormous variety of ways in which they can not go well. And we have a huge number of negative emotions, actually. There's many more words, negative emotions, many more varieties of them, interestingly. But if we didn't care about stuff, if we didn't have desires, then when stuff goes well or not, there wouldn't be an emotional response to these things. So so I would say that it's a type of feeling, it's got this cognitive element, it's got this conceptual link to desires. You can put a list of other components, such as they normally involve recognizable or predictable facial expressions, body language. There's action tendencies associated with some of the more basic emotions, things like anger and fear. And many of them, possibly not all, but will have obvious physiological correlates as well, to do with the autonomic nervous system and that sort of thing. But these things, again, that's all fine. I mean, we can argue about what should be on this list and so forth. But I think that the two that I've primarily highlighted there are fairly uncontroversial. So the point at the bottom of that slide I've already made. So this is, I love this quote. I use this in my human nature class to introduce emotion. So this is from psychologist Richard Lazarus. So he says, from an emotional reaction, we can learn much about what a person has at stake in the encounter with the environment or in life in general, how that person interprets self and world, and how harms, threats, and challenges are coped with. No other concept in psychology is as richly revealing of the way an individual relates to life and to the specifics of the physical and social environment. So making the point that an investigation of an emotion or a person's particular emotional episode or response to a situation it's like the beginning of an investigation. It's all the clues are there in a sense that they're incredibly revealing. So one of the reasons, or I think what could make emotional intelligence distinctive is the fact that we should view them as kind of coded messages. That if you pay attention to a particular emotion, feeling, response you have to a situation, there may be some immediate, sometimes it might just be obvious, but quite often it's not entirely obvious, and it's worth exploring it. So it contains information, if you like. And I think Lazarus is making that kind of a point. It's almost like you could start with emotions and open up the entirety of human psychology from there. In terms of their function, I mean, this relates to what I just said. That one way, I don't think this counts for all emotions, but certainly maybe what explains the reason why we have them in the first place. Instead of just having desires and thoughts, we have emotions as well, which they can act as a kind of heuristic. So a heuristic means it's a shortcut. What they'll do is they'll prompt quick responses to situations. They'll prioritize information. If we're feeling afraid, we'll tend to pick out aspects of our environment which might be threatening. If we're feeling angry, we're far more attuned to injustices or forms of frustration and what's caused that frustration as well. So they can be seen as, if you like, a quick ways of, partly instinctive. A lot of it will come from learning, but they, if you like, contain a lot of information which is quickly transmitted to us, which has an effect on our perception and our cognition, and also on our readiness for action. But this can get subtle as well. Situations where you have an intuition about something, or a gut feeling, feel a vibe about a particular person, or in books, you sometimes famous or dramatic examples of firemen or people in the military who had to make a quick decision about something that was a life and death situation. Do you get the other firefighters out the building or not? And they said, I just knew I had to get them out, but I didn't know why. So in other words, they had a gut feeling about it, and that gut feeling wasn't luck, and it wasn't instinct. What it was is years and years of training, which had made them sensitive to certain features which registered unconsciously. And that unconscious registering of certain features of the situation, certain smells, certain noises, heat levels, whatever it might be, was, if you like, communicated to them in an intuition or in a gut feeling. So often under circumstances where we don't have time to process things fully, the emotion can do the job, if you like, of pointing us in the right direction. Antonio Damasio talks about them as being somatic markers. So if you like, and in the way he puts it, because he comes from a neurological point of view, but a kind of an embodied memory of the significance of certain events, if you like, quickly transmitted to us so that quick decisions can be made.
So subconscious and conscious processes also play a role in it. The subconscious is saying it's wrong, that not to help there from other countries. And for us, the consciousness told us in this program that we have to help. So there is a role of both these processes as well.
Yeah, if I'm understanding your question rightly, then yeah, we clearly work at a conscious and an unconscious level, and an awful lot of the way we engage with the world works unconsciously. It's being filtered, it's being processed at a level that we're barely aware of a lot of the time, but that doesn't make it dumb. doesn't make it unintelligent. So yes, so emotions, so that a situation can occur, which, I mean, there'll be aspects of it which are absolutely clear. You hear that someone's been talking about you behind your back in a negative way, so you're angry, and it's clear what the source of the anger is. But there'll be other situations, like the ones that I've just talked about there, where it's much more subtle than that. And so things that it's and even in the situation of being angry because someone's talked behind your back, the anger, the emotion of anger, you might be distracted by something else, but you'll probably keep coming back to it. And what keeps bringing you back to it, until you resolve the issue, till you confront the person, or you find out that it's not true, whatever it might be, you keep coming back to it. And it's that anger in your system that keeps, that won't let go, if you like. It becomes a reminder of it.
When you sleep, at the night, you still again remember all of the things you can say to them bitterly. You can confront them.
Absolutely.
This was the best, I would say, at that time. But we commit to emotions when it's a little time to make decisions.
Sorry, Anna, say that one again.
I'm saying that when you don't have time to make decision, you mostly commit to the emotions. You become frustrated and might go in hand with anger, right?
Right. That's that. Yes. Very good. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, part of emotional intelligence is recognizing we've got a tendency to do that, and not going with that immediate. This is why they can get a reputation of being irrational. It's like, if you, as most of us have learned, if you receive an email that is annoying in some way or has angered you, do not reply to it straight away. Okay, because you'll invariably regret what you say as a result, because it's being led by a high level of arousal, a high level of anger, and it's the anger which is it's what the anger will give you is part of the situation at best. And this is the point I'm going to go on to make, is there's no question that following your emotion, letting it keep your attention, exploring it back to whether conscious or unconscious, or however deep it might be, what is it that is bothering me here? Why is it bothering me? What to do about it? Do I try to cope with it in some way, reassess the situation? Do I act? Do I confront the person? Whatever it might be. So it's incredibly useful all the time that it is aligned with reflection. But by itself, that's where its reputation, I think, comes from. It's sort of hot-headed decisions. It's acting too quickly when you need not to be. But from those the examples that we had before of the firefighters and so forth, there's within the same realm, call it affect, if you like, a feeling about something can actually be very useful. But we have to be very aware of the context of that's decades or years of training, which can lead to that kind of form of emotional intelligence, I suppose. So in terms of raising the question of rationality, are emotions rational, or are they simply irrational? I mean, again, I've kind of hinted at, or even just given several of these answers already, to be honest. So, as I say, number one here, our feelings about something can often be seen as a crude, an easy alternative to thinking about it. And even just that example about angry, immediate response to an email could be that. And it can feel good. You've got that pent-up feeling, and you unleash it in some way through an action, and probably quite quickly afterwards you regret it. Strong emotions are known to distort cognition as well. They'll narrow perception. Our view of the world becomes much more tailored towards where the emotion is directing us, if you like. And there's been a huge amount of research in recent decades which demonstrates how these effects work. I might say more about that in a second. A useful distinction can be between cognitive and practical rationality here. Cognitive rationality, I think, is along the lines of the question. So if you ask someone, was that a rational decision? was it in accordance with the evidence? Was it not contradictory in some way to other beliefs that you hold or other decisions that you've made? And you can similarly say, was that a rational thing to feel? So if someone's lost something very important to them, we would expect them to feel sad. And we'd expect, depending on how important that thing is, we'd expect them to feel very sad or a little bit sad or whatever. So if it's not rational, then it's either inappropriate. Someone has lost something important to them, but they don't appear to be feeling sad, or they're laughing or something, then we're worried at that point. This doesn't seem a rational response, or it might be disproportionate. So dealing with a narcissist like Donald Trump, say, and they, at the slightest hint of a criticism, they fly off the handle. Again, this seems to be is wildly disproportionate. It's just a minor slight, and you're furious as a result. This doesn't seem rational. Again, when understood in this way, I mean, philosopher Robert Solomon has argued, but I mean, it's not the end of the argument, but it's useful to work with this. As emotions are not irrational, people are irrational. So if the narcissist flies off the handle because of a minor slight, from their point of view, no slight is minor, because they view themselves as being superior and perfect. And because of that, even a small criticism is very, very distressing and outrageous in some way. So in other words, it's not really the angry response that is irrational. It's not the anger that's irrational. It's the beliefs and the desires that underpin it. It's the person, if you like, in a more holistic sense here, that is actually being irrational. So if we say, what is that a rational thing to feel? What we're kind of getting at is, understood in this way, the emotion is kind of, it's just being dragged along by the beliefs, or being dragged along by the person's personality or desires. It's kind of non-rational, I suppose. It just becomes a reflection of something deeper. So we're coming back to that issue of being a messenger, if you like. So as far as that goes, I'm on someone like Solomon's side. I don't think this is, we're going to find a distinctive kind of emotional intelligence there, or a good answer to emotions being rational or irrational. Where he doesn't, and again, there's where we need to go from here, though, is into this area which I've already alluded to, is once you're experiencing an emotion. Now, so the anger or the frustration or the guilt or the sadness or whatever, let's say it's an entirely rational response to a situation. It's proportionate, it's appropriate, but once you're in it, especially if it's strong, it will then have distorting effects on your subsequent judgments. So it has its own agenda, and it narrows perceptions. It makes you pay attention to some things and not to others. It does not lead to a balanced view of the world, and a balanced view of the world is what is required for rational decision making. So, exactly, with depression and anxiety, with cognitive behavioral therapy is very, very well aware of the ways in which these disorders will distort your perceptions of yourself and of the world. Negative interpretations of events. If things go wrong, it's your fault. If things go right, it was just luck, and a whole realm of these kinds of beliefs which have been found to underpin these kinds of disorders. And it's led by the feeling, and then there's some vicious cycles that are created, but the feeling itself has this kind of power to direct us towards particular interpretations of situations, to frame the world in particular ways. The red mist of anger, or romantic love, is a good example as well, which again, there's maybe some debate as to whether this is an emotion in any obvious sense, but come back to the category issue here. But anyone who's experienced romantic love knows that you're kind of crazy. I mean, you have a wildly distorted idea of that person as being the one, as being perfect, and so forth. That has very little connection to reality. So you may be very well suited to that person, and if you like, strong feelings of liking and different kinds of love may be entirely appropriate because of the nature of your relationship. But romantic love seems to again have its own agenda that will affect your judgment and decision making.
We often ourselves make us perfectionists. I have high standard. We often don't allow others to be part of us because we have some superiority biases as well.
We have some superiority
Biases.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, Slightly more worrying is, I mean, we all know this about strong emotions. The research shows that again, weak emotions can have a subtly distorting effect as well. What I think is occasionally referred to as emotional framing. I quite like this terminology as well. But again, it gives a particular way of looking at the world. I'll try and be as quick as possible with one experiment, which I know quite well, and I think illustrates this really nicely. You could take two groups of people and you put them into either a vaguely sad mood or a vaguely angry mood. And this was American participants, so the sad mood was generated by stories about it was some stories to do with some injustice anyway that was committed. Sorry, I was saying don't know that well. The angry mood was anti-American demonstrations, which probably annoy quite a lot of Americans in some country or other. Once you've got them sort of in these particular frames of mind or moods, you then you subdivide each one into two other groups and you subject them to an argument about raising taxes. And that argument is either framed from sort of angry sort of justice point of view, whereby if we raise taxes, we'll be able to catch tax dodgers, slightly ironically, people trying to evade taxes. And the other argument is from it engages with a more sad perspective, whereby if we raise taxes, we can help people who've fallen upon misfortune through no fault of their own. So what typically happens is if someone's already in a sad frame of mind, they're going to be much more receptive, much more easily persuaded by the sad message, because there's a fit, there's a dovetail between the two. People in the angry frame of mind will be much more easily persuaded by the angry message. So again, it's what they're picking out of their environment, what they're filtering through. And these are pretty low level moods as well, but will still alter the way in which we frame and interpret what we listen to, what we remember from the arguments that come our way. I think possibly a more effective way of thinking about emotions and rationalities in terms of practical rationality. And the question I think sort of captures this: is it rational for a decision to be informed by an emotion, even if that emotion is cognitively biased? So the affect heuristic, by the way, is a sort of a general notion that was named by Paul Slovich, who works in risk perception, of if you like, basing a decision on your feeling about it more rather than anything else. And it comes back to this idea of understanding emotions as being heuristics. There's a quote here from Slovich, which is really nice. But it just kind of underlines the pervasiveness and the potency, if you like, of this tendency. So the affect heuristic is at once both wondrous and frightening, wondrous in its speed and subtlety and sophistication and its ability to lubricate reason. In other words, it tells us what to think, where to direct our thinking. Frightening in its dependence and the speed of our thinking as well. Frightening in its dependency upon context and experience, allowing us to be led astray or manipulated inadvertently or unintentionally, silently and invisibly as well. And this is where there's so much interesting research again about the unconscious, using this idea of dual process theory and the ways in which all sorts of features of who is it who's delivering the message, what's in the background of the message, what kind of metaphors are they using. There's so many different things that if you know your audience well, you can push these buttons. They do not know these buttons are being pushed, but what you're doing is affecting their feeling about the message that is being delivered. And that feeling will play, if you're not really alive to this, will play a significant role in whether you accept that message or not, whether you accept that argument or not. So remind myself where I am. Yeah, practical rationality. So from the facilitation of decision making in some way, we can see from an evolutionary perspective how emotions are useful for making quick decisions, and when we were pre-linguistic creatures, presumably emotions and feelings would play a huge role. And we watch the way that animals learn and negative and positive responses to various stimuli and so forth. This is emotional based learning as well, and we do all of this. So it's got these kinds of uses, but where I think it's we're looking at it in terms of its value for decision making and its relationship to critical thinking, it has the potential to, it's not often going to lead us directly to, if you like, a more intelligent understanding of a situation or a better decision, but it can help facilitate it. So I'm saying here, sometimes emotions have practical value in slow decision making, rather not just fast decision making, through drawing up certain memories, making some things more important than others. So instead of deciding or acting immediately on the basis of feeling, use it as a prompt for reflection. So raising questions like, why am I feeling this? What can this feeling tell me? So again, coming back to this metaphor, I suppose, of emotions as being a messenger of the unconscious. You have faith that at least there's the possibility, maybe quite a strong possibility, that this feeling you've got about a situation contains, if you pursue it, it contains valuable information. It can lead you to a deeper understanding or appreciation of what's going on. This is a very sad example, which is in the first edition of the book. I'm probably going to keep it in this one as well, even though it's off our radar from a news point of view in the West, at least. It's a situation in Syria. At that time, civil war was raging. You had a huge amount of people trying to leave the country, and there in all sorts of newspapers around the world, certainly the British press, we had this coverage of this kid, Alan Kurdi, who had just drowned trying to get across from Syria to Turkey, I think it was. And there was this picture of this Turkish police officer just lifting this little 3-year-old kid, just wearing normal clothes like any other 3-year-old kid, just lifting this lifeless body off the beach. It's absolutely unbearable, heartbreaking image. So what that can clearly do is manipulate feeling. We've seen quite a few of these with the attempted evacuation of Kabul as well in recent weeks, and clearly with the baby being lifted over the wire fence by the American soldiers. So it's very easy for images to have an immediate emotional impact, and maybe then quickly lead to, well, okay, this is clearly what we need to do. We need to embrace these immigrants. There needs to be a greater effort made by the UN or whatever it might be. All things which are probably true in this particular instance. So, but what I suppose from a newspaper's point of view, and this is coming from the Independent paper, which is just an online paper now in the UK, saying, well, instead of it just being sensationalist in some way or deliberately manipulative, so they're kind of conscious of this, but they're saying that this newspaper has taken the decision to publish these images because among the often glib words about the ongoing migrant crisis, it's all too easy to forget the reality of the desperate situation facing many. The point being, and assuming they're being honest about this, and I think this is where we could have become fatigued, if you like, of just, we just hear about it, just becomes words. It becomes, we superficially engage with the idea, forgetting that what this suffering actually means, what the risks are, what is happening to people, including children. And so the empathy that we feel, the sadness that we feel, never easy, especially sad, an incredibly difficult emotion to actually maintain. It's a really difficult one. We'd far rather be angry or something like that. Maybe you would turn this into anger as a way of dealing with it, if you like. But they're saying, but what it helps, if you, that experience of that sadness, of that empathy, helps you understand the situation better. So it serves as a prompt, it serves as a motivator to go deeper into a particular realm of understanding, if you like. So how are we doing for time? Okay. I'm just going to say, because not least because it was in the title of the talk, I'm going to say something about emotional intelligence, but hopefully it's been fairly obvious now what the ways in which I think it's emotions can be intelligent. this is one of those areas where, again, it's pretty daunting just how much literature is out there and the different theories and approaches to it. As far as I can work out, there is this distinction between trait approaches and ability theories. Sometimes the traits that they're talking about are that it's just a different way of understanding abilities, like the four abilities that are listed there. But sometimes it takes it into wider sort of regions, like, I mean, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, and emotional intelligence starts to be aligned with other what are called hot intelligences, so social intelligence and personal intelligence. So the kind of more holistic approach where an emotion, what makes an emotionally intelligent person? Well, they tend to be courageous, trustworthy, conscientious, these sorts of things as well, which is all fine, but it kind of loses its moorings a little bit and takes us into what a philosopher again would call virtue theory, if you like, how to live well, what kind of characteristics to try to develop. For this reason, I'm slightly keener on the ability approach, which does come from the originators of this idea of emotional intelligence, so John Mayer and Peter Salovey in particular. And so these four aspects of it, being able to accurately perceive and name, and there's multiple subcategories under each of these, by the way, and this is why it's a minefield, this area in some ways. But I think these four are, hopefully the way I'm going to try to describe them, are distinctive enough and make sense enough of what we would generally conceive of as being an emotionally intelligent person. So you know when you're experiencing a particular emotion, you know, generally speaking, the kind of emotion that it is, and also recognize it in others from what they say and from their nonverbal expression. Understand how they affect our thinking. So very much along the lines of a lot of stuff we've been talking about so far today, that they have this heuristic function, but they can also aid reflection as well. Understanding emotions, as they put it. So in the broad sense of the kinds of situations, for example, that provoke them, associated action tendencies, and the ability to manage emotions in self and others, to not let them overwhelm us, to know how to calm someone down. Obviously, the one thing you don't say is calm down, but there's all sorts of ways in which empathetic listening, trying to understand how things are looking like from their point of view. There's various sort of standard ways in which you can attempt to diffuse a potentially hot-headed situation. Understanding that, as I'll say very briefly later on, that one thing about emotions in dialogues is that emotions beget emotions. That they cause, one person gets emotional, the chance the other person will get emotional back at them. And then you've lost your moorings. Chances are you're not going to have a constructive dialogue. So an appreciation of that is in the mix as well. I'm going to spare you my penalty taking example, but a good way of understanding this, and you do find this, but often, I mean, I have one thing I work really hard on is examples, and I think too many textbooks and in academic papers that they're very they've got this really rich theory and then some really weak examples which they use to illustrate it. I've got a rich example here, which is quite personal. Probably I'm going to stick it in the book anyway. But again, for the sake of time, I'm probably going to spare you that. Dual process theory, I've already said something about. I'm going to skip over this more or less. In the first edition of the book, it was the Kahneman and Tversky who were the best known form of dual process theory, the fast automatic part of the mind and information processing versus the slow and more deliberate one, system 1 system 2 respectively. That's how they describe them. Well, that's how Kahneman in his the only book that's been written on this is after Tversky died is this. It's supposed to be for a general readership. It's actually quite difficult and very long, but useful for an academic. The second edition, so I'm going to leave Tversky and Kahneman in. They're very interested in cognition, in thinking and reasoning errors, and identify classic reasoning errors which lead us to understand the kind of heuristics that System 1 uses. What I've subsequently discovered is the work of Seymour Epstein, who I need to make absolutely sure this guy's work is credible, but I'm 95% sure that he's respected enough for me to use him, because I really like what he does and what his approach is. And he's got a far deeper and richer conceptualization of system one, but he's absolutely working with a dual process model. But he talks about the content of system one as not being just understood in terms of heuristics, but he talks a lot about this emotional context. He calls it affect driven. He says it's where a lot of learning through association goes on. It responds to concrete examples and images, going back to the Alan Kurdi one, for example. It thinks in terms of crude categories, which again, Kahneman and Tversky would certainly be in agreement with that. But I love this one. So beliefs are experienced as self-evidently valid. What you know is what you know, and you're not going to be, thrown off of that. And it's highly hedonistic. Its ultimate aim is to feel good. Mm. And often that can involve having your existing beliefs about the world confirmed. So this idea of the confirmation bias, of a self-serving bias, of overconfidence, all these things that we're so prone to are all, you could say, partly at least designed to keep us feeling comfortable in our vision of the world. Because what Epstein also does in one of his books is talk about basic needs that we have. And one of them is that need for the world to be predictable. So if unpredictability is a threat, it's something that makes us uncomfortable. It's not going to adhere to this hedonistic sort of design, if you like, of the what he calls the experiential system. By the way, I don't quite know how to stop people doing this, but even my postgraduate students do this. It's not experimental; it's experiential. But it's remarkable how many people just say, I mean, I'm not sure it even makes a great deal of sense, but because it's such an unusual word, it could look so similar to experimental. I think that must be where the error comes from. So if I'm including, I will include Epstein in the book somewhere, the likelihood is it will go into this chapter. And then what it does is say emotions need to be understood in terms of this context, underlying beliefs and desires, which are hard to access. And all of that makes this the requirement to, if you like, take feelings and emotions seriously, at least up to a point when aligned with reflection and so forth. It at the very least underlines just how that's not an easy process. So especially with an approach like I'm taking, where self-reflection, the development of virtues is really important here, then you need to understand yourself in these ways as well. So this rich conception of the experiential mind, in contrast to the rational mind, is incredibly helpful. And also what you find here, which I don't think Tversky and Kahneman talk about in any great depth, but I think is really important, is how do the two interact? Are you either functioning in the rational mind or the experiential mind, or system one or system two? Is it an either or is there kind of constant, a seeping through, if you like, of the experiential mind into the rational mind? And yes is the answer. It's not like they're completely separate things, and we're making various assumptions, and we're being led in certain ways by very subtle forms of emotionality and affect, feelings about things, and unconscious beliefs, and so on and so forth. And a lot of the time, in order to get to the truth, or to get to at least to understand why there's a disagreement between people, requires an exploration of these things, and in the first instance an awareness that it's there, because I would still suggest that most people don't know this is how the mind works. If you talk about the unconscious, most people just think about Freud and psychoanalysis, which is a very partial, and now actually, if you talk about Freud, it actually discredited to a great extent view of how the mind works. Whereas, but psychodynamic psychology in other respects is alive and well and extremely important. And what I like about Epstein is he assimilates, he makes sense of that in terms of his views as well, and I think in a very sensible way. And by the way, again, partly what's unusual about Epstein is this: he does link his ideas to psychotherapy as well. And for me, there's always been a strong link between what critical thinking is doing, the way that I teach it at least, and something like cognitive therapy.
Like ego and id, all of that play their part. And we find some ways to soothe our egos. We find some ways to convince ourselves, our emotions, that you're rational, I'm different from everyone. And often we sometimes consider other person lazy when they are not doing work, and we become also a bit biased against them as well. As you were talking about hedonistic techniques and desires, if I say that, even if I say this word desire, everyone is going to imagine their own desires. It's that in fact impactful and strong word. So, is there such a thing, Mr. Stewart? We often sometimes say that let's commit to this desire and we will not do it again. It is going to, we are going to relax for a while. Or we should never do that. We should never commit to the desire to stop it. You
Can
know,
you can you
there
give
are,
me can you give me an example?
yes, for example, there, if I take, in our culture, we are very, we have a lot of values. We have a lot of religious values, and most of things we consider sin. Like we have, even you can consider seven deadly sins. You know, lust, the greed for wealth, and every greed for everything is sometimes we consider, we desire for it. So we think that let's commit this time, let's fulfill our desire so we can stop it, we can relax for a while. Or sometimes we think that should we commit to it, or should we stop us strictly. Does that work? For most of people, the belief is that if we commit to the desire for now, we will be relaxed and we promise to ourselves we are not going to do it again.
Anna, that is a massive question, isn't it? Which I mean, that is. I mean, it, I could offer a view on this, but I mean, it's such a huge question. Uh, I mean, if I think the general view from this is how I mean, from I know a bit about counseling and psychotherapy and how these things work, and for the most part, leaving something, uh, not acknowledging you have a particular desire, always viewing it as being bad, and therefore yourself as being bad, is not healthy. So the first thing that they would recommend is acknowledge it, acknowledge that you have it. You can then maybe evaluate it in different ways to how your culture has evaluated, but that's going to be extremely tricky in the way you've been brought up and so forth. But then I presume at that point, you're able to make some choices. Do I, if you like, take my personality or my traits and my virtues in this particular direction? And if so, is that possible? How do I do that? Or how do I sublimate these particular desires that I have into other, it could be into religious ritual, it could be into artistic things, it could be into sport. There's a whole ways in which cultures, again, are set up to sublimate certain tendencies. I mean, it may be sport and aggression or whatever it might be. So again, that is that would be, I'm pretty sure, the orthodoxy of it. I mean, it's much easier said than done, isn't it?
Exactly.
but holding, if you a recipe for unhappiness is to believe that you're a bad person. So if you've got a culture which is saying this are bad, and you have a basic idea that you do have these tendencies, then you're not going to view yourself in a very good light. So that I mean, one of the basic rules of counseling psychology is a complete acceptance on behalf of the therapist or the counselor. A complete accept, whatever you say to them, they're still going to give you unconditional positive regard in the way that a good parent should.
Mm.
So in other words, that they need to be able to love themselves, warts and all. And I sound like an old hippie saying that, but I can see the sense in that kind of an approach. So yeah, in that sense, it absolutely relates to. I mean, it's taking us a long way from critical thinking in many respects, but it's on the same. It's the same kind of a message. If we're going to think more rationally, this is quite a holistic project. And this is going to be of value to us, then we need to know how to deal with, we need to know how to become more tolerant. We need to recognize our own flaws and therefore be more tolerant of the flaws of others. We need to be much more humble. So there is a sense in which, but humble, but not lacking self-esteem or not having shame about ourselves. Again, very fine lines. This is why for Aristotle, virtues sit between two extremes. Humility sits between, on the one hand, arrogance, which we know,
Yes.
but on the other hand, low self-esteem as well. It has to be an accurate perception of yourself that is at the heart of humility, if you like. Again, not easy to achieve, but very, very important at the same time. So, I mean, at the bottom of this bit, I just put this question, which, again, we're not going to have time to really deal with today, but again, not many critical thinking books, if any, are going to deal with this, but I do it sounds like I teach an inordinate number of courses, but I do teach quite a lot. But one which I've been teaching and getting quite into in the last few years is environmental communication. And what you learn from that, so it's about how it's particularly focused on climate change and how you get people to acknowledge its reality and act in accordance with that reality. And one of the first lessons you learn about persuasive communication is just telling people the facts is at best only part of what's going to make any difference. There's a whole set of other things you need to address as well. So if critical thinking is going to make broad claims about being able to change minds, it needs to take this into consideration. And one of the reasons why it is so hard to change people's minds is because of dual process theory. It's because of all that's lodged and has been learned over a lifetime, and all the habits, and our whole identity is wrapped up with with our experiential system. So you have to find a way of engaging with that for the most part if you're going to change minds. However, arguments are in the mix. Knowledge, information nearly always needs to be there as well, but it's rarely the only thing you need to do to make a difference. So it doesn't undermine the subject area, but I think it importantly contextualizes this subject area. This is from Deanna Kuhn's book on arguments, which is it's regarded as a bit of a classic. It's one of the few very long studies looking at how people reason, and so it's a piece of qualitative social science research. Anyway, amongst I won't go into the detail of what she discovered, but this is just a quote from the book, which I think really nicely illustrates this point. So there's various questions that she posed to people in this research in various areas where what's your view on this, or why do you think, in this instance, why do you think some students or pupils fail at school? What do you think's behind this? And they give their reasons. And she's then trying to engage them with, well, counter evidence and arguments, and just see how they respond to this and how they view the status of knowledge and opinion in this area. This person says, I suppose intellectually someone, sorry, she says, could someone prove that your view was wrong? And this person, I suppose intellectually someone could give me statistics that would show that the position I hold reflects only a minority of reasons why children fail, and therefore prove I was wrong. But I would probably not change my opinion. It's the result of lifelong personal experience, and quite frankly, I think it is right. I think it reflects the reality of the situation as I've experienced it. There is so much going on in that quotation, but at the very least, I hope it illustrates a familiar situation, and so many of us are going to understand and relate to as well. That even if at some level, this is at the very sort of the high functioning of the rational mind, I get it, but I can't. Still, I see what you're saying, but it's still not enough to convince me that something else is required as well. Okay, now I'm gonna. So we're reaching the end of what I wanted to talk about. I'll just say something about emotions as an argument form and how I'm not going to give these examples because it will take too long. But I'll just say this: I'm quite interested in argument forms, and a lot of my book is taken up by discussing a whole number of them. And there are many. I mean, I maybe deal with 20 in the book or something like that. But what you typically get with an argument form is it's got a distinctive premise. So a slippery slope argument is along the lines of, if you make this policy change, which could be mildly beneficial or neutral, what will happen is there's a series of predictable steps that you can't undo and will lead to a disastrous outcome. So legalizing cannabis is this kind of argument is used in various Western countries, and euthanasia is used for that as well. They're quite common forms of argument, but they've got an identifiable structure. And if those features are not there, then it's not a slippery slope argument. And there are various things that are called critical questions that can be applied. In other words, if someone's presented what seems to be a slippery slope argument, You can ask questions of it, such as, is it really the case that these things will happen? Can they really not be undone? Is the final consequence really disastrous? So that they're quite, you can systematically kind of unpack them or understand their structure in that way. With arguments that are appeals to emotions, they don't have anything like that structure. So there's no, you can't find, all you're looking at is something within the argument, whether it's to do with the subject matter or the use of language or nonverbal communication, perhaps in the delivery of it. But if it's written arguments, it's usually coming back to emotionally forceful language or emotional content. But again, what doesn't have emotional content? I mean, if something's doesn't matter to you, you're probably not going to engage in an argument about it. So it's going to matter at some level, in which case, to some degree at least, there's going to be personal involvement, and where there's personal involvement, there's emotions, whether it's to do with the actual subject matter or whether it's to do with the fear of being wrong or disproved or falling out with the person that you're arguing with. Emotions are just simply always going to be there. So to try to come up with, if you like, a form of argument which represents an appeal to emotions doesn't work. And I think this is pretty much reflected. You got it, an attempt from Douglas Walton in a couple of his textbooks. I haven't found it in anyone else's. And even Walton now, I don't think talks about it in more recent publications of his as well. So I think it's just kind of been squeezed out. And I think this is the reason why. But that's not a reason not to include it in a critical thinking book. I've already made that point. So this is more or less what I do in the first edition of the book, and it's a sort of a revamped set of critical questions which will come towards the end or at the end of that chapter, which are ones that you always kind of need to bear in mind, because you will hopefully agree that we are emotion-driven creatures. We are emotional creatures. They will always, or nearly always, play a part in our dialogues and in our attempt to assess and formulate arguments, in which case then try to bear in mind, at least get the gist of these kinds of questions. Is this an argument that has generated strong emotions in me, whether through its content or delivery or both? Do the emotions arise as a natural consequence of the subject matter of the argument, or are they disproportionate or incongruent in some way? That could be because that your buttons are being pushed by the person who's delivering the argument, but it could be something that's coming from you in terms of your reaction to it as well. If emotions arise as a natural consequence of the subject matter of the argument, are they representative of a balanced view of the issues? So again, if you've just got the Alan Kurdi example, or you've just got a picture of babies being lifted over the fence at Kabul airport, again, as significant as that is, and a way that can bring knowledge with it in all sorts of ways, it's not going to be the end of the discussion, if you like. It's not going to be a balanced view in and of itself. And if it is balanced, then is this the strength of the argument, including insights assisted by the emotions evoked, rather than the feelings themselves, in other words, the affect heuristic, that leads me to accept or reject the conclusion? So you're not just doing it in a more immediate and automatic way based on the feelings that that arise, and letting them, if you like, guide your subsequent thinking and decision making. They always have to be aligned with, and again, it's complicated, but in ways which are, again, an emotionally intelligent person would hopefully be able to do. You align those feelings, you manage those feelings in a way that assists rational deliberation rather than impedes rational deliberation. Okay, we're kind of getting towards the end of the time that was allotted. So, I mean, I've said one or two things about dialogue, but if I haven't said this already, I'll just say this thing at the top. If we're going to change our minds, generally it's by being challenged, in which case, I have said this actually, in which case dialogues are just so important. If we're not able to interact with others, receive criticism, give criticism in ways which will help remain civil, that don't get overly emotional, and so on, then the chances of changing minds are significantly reduced, of having our own minds change, of being able to change the minds of others. So to be aware of that relationship between effective dialogue and emotionality is enormously important. So I've started with this question: why include a chapter on emotions in the CT book, in a critical thinking book? So hopefully that's been explained. I've talked about my approach to critical thinking, the role that emotions play in decision making, including dual process theory. and again, a point I don't think I haven't necessarily made, but people know this as well. I mean, you know, even if it's not at the forefront of your mind, quickly you say, if this book is about effective decision making, then we know that in the mix here is emotions in various ways. So it needs to be addressed. A broad awareness of how emotions operate and how we can optimize and mitigate their effects is highly relevant to being a good critical thinker. So a chapter early on emphasizing this is important. So if I've got an argument here, it's just like, that's why it's going in the book. That's why I've paid more attention to it this time around. Right, so that's me, Anam. I don't know how strict you are going to be with time. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, very well said. I totally get it. And you made it really easy for me today to understand all of these concepts, argumentation. I was often, when you told us about that, how people failed and the dual theory processes and in schools. I remember that we used to have a lot of myths as a students. You know, when you step on the grass, and on the whole session you're going to fail, you have to pet the unicorn in order to pass. Those myths and beliefs actually worked for us. And furthermore, I think that my panel is curious to ask many questions, and we have audience as well. So let's start our Q&A session. And dear audience, you can all raise your hands if you want to ask questions, or if you can also write it on the chat box if you have any questions for Mr. Stewart. Okay, so we have one participant with us. Yes, sure. Ask the question, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Anam. And it's really very nice to hear Mr. Stuart Hanscop's presentation and session. Mr. Stewart, I have an impression after hearing your complete session and this interactive session that you are time and again making one assertion that there is a kind of, trade-off between emotions and rationality, which I have understood. Please correct me if that is the bottom line of your whole session.
Sorry, just say that again.
I'm saying that I am getting an impression from your session that there is a kind of trade-off between emotion and rationality. Is it so?
I haven't thought about it in quite those terms, but possibly. So carry on.
Okay, thank you. You see, I'm a teacher of economics, so I don't know whether I will be properly framing my question to your understanding, but I think that we usually, use this term of rationality, and the term rationality has specific connotation in the subject of economics, that we have to decide on the basis of maximization of utility. That is very rational attitude. And if we maximize, if entrepreneur actually, goes for making maximization of profit, that is a very rational attitude or behavior on the part of that entrepreneur. So that means that rationality has some kind of relationship with some kind of self-interest aggregation or self-interest achievement. So I would be bit, posing my question in a slightly, different manner. Since you have also, talked about your dual process theory, so I will be begging some kind of, thoughtful process from that theory as well. That two particular, thought processes coming out from two different thoughts coming from two different thought processes. So to me, this rationality is somewhat kind of product of existing larger economic consumerist culture as well, because the present consumerist culture is actually, mobilizing large scale subjectivities, desires, and needs on the part of large population who are basically now global consumers of different kind of products. So there is a lot of knowledge being justifying their consumerism and their actually, consumption of specific thing, being rational consumer. So that means that rationality is grounded actually in a kind of situation where the person's subjectivities and desires are being manufactured by specific larger structures. And here I mean, when I say larger structure, that I mean the economic arrangement, economic structure. So there comes the idea of emotion. Now, emotional phase of human being may be asking for some kind of relief or betterment to the poor, to the needies, but rational attitude may not be actually confirming it. So to me, rational may not be always actually, I mean, by default, or necessarily we cannot say that rationality is a kind of term which may be taken into its generic meaning. Rationality is also problematic. It could be problematic. That on what ground you are making your reason to be rational. So
Well,
emotions.
I think, yeah, you, as far as I can work out, you're saying that economics equates rationality with self-interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, rational decision is one that's made in accordance with your wishes. So you have to have an understanding of your wishes or your desires and how to prioritize them within particular contexts. And if the decision you make is in accordance with that, then it's a rational decision. So what your desires are and all the rest of it is completely left in the air. Yeah, it could be self-interest, it could be global justice, equality, it could be anything, compassion-led, and so forth. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So finally, I would be basically making my point here that rationality. So to me, rationality is subject to your conditions in which you are actually, drawing and constructing your rationality. On what parameters, on what foundations, on what reasons you are actually, building your rationality.
Yeah.
And to me, the present age is unfortunately or fortunately, maybe it may be fortunately for many, it may be unfortunate for a person like me actually. You see, the present age is an age when even your rationality is being constructed on the basis of global economic structures, desires.
Yeah.
I mean, the business is behind, I mean, any kind of rationality. So whatever is being moved, whatever is being convinced on the part of larger, population, it is usually, considered rational. Yet that rationality is, providing some kind of business benefits to the larger, international, multinational companies or whatever. So the emotions which we consider that these emotions are, a kind of, strong kind of, vibe or wave or thinking in someone's mind that actually, provides you, I mean, takes you in a behavior that may not be, suited to you, or that may not be good. So, but my point is that if your emotions are actually, your instinctive emotions, man may have some instinctive emotions, and if your decision is based upon certain instinctive emotions, that may be better than that rationality which is being actually, providing justification to the big businesses.
And so, one of those instinctive emotions, or
man emotions, is I can say about it that man is primarily cooperative being.
I
Number
agree.
one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Man wants to see nature intact around him or her, because you see, nature protects him, nature provides him justification of living. Yeah. But my rationality says cut these trees, clear these path, because it is going to give you some monetary benefit. So the rationality is in conflict with emotion. So similar is the case. My neighbor may not be having enough food, but my rationality says don't feed him, accumulate your money, because you are going to invest it somewhere else. So I mean I mean, this is very tricky thing for me as well. You see, your lens may be different, but my lens is providing me different, sort of story as well. It may be parallax of views. Your lens may be providing you different kind of, understanding. My economic lens provides me different, understanding of this whole, idea. But I tell you one thing, this whole session has made me to read some stuff which is related to it, that how I can understand this idea of rationality and emotional binary from the lens of politics. That what is the politics of this rationality and what is the politics of emotions, which is basically dragging us to this particular discussion. It is really nice hearing you. It is really nice, having you here. And I tell you one thing, that I would love to, read your book. Very soon, perhaps I'm going to, read your book as well, that how I can understand more about your ideas.
There's a
Thank
recent discovery I've made of, there's been quite a lot of work around the work of dual process theory in certainly voter preferences, but a lot of political behaviors as well. I can send everybody a kind of, what I don't have is a set of references for that's detailed for what I've been talking about, but I can generate that. But Lodge and Tabor is called the rationalizing voter. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's definitely politics meeting dual process theory, if you like. And there's a ton of other stuff that's gone on, specifically from a political angle on that, which you might find interesting.
All right, this was, I guess, Mr. Amir with us. And let's move towards another query I have from Miss Marva. Miss Marva, please ask the question. Miss Marva, can you hear me? Yes, she's here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anam, for giving me an opportunity to speak. Hello, Mr. Stewart. I'm Marva.
Hello.
And I really enjoyed your presentation. And the thing why I enjoyed it the most is I read your book last night, and I read that part which you were mentioning. It was like page 26 to 56, I guess. You are talking about emotions. I have read that part, and I have certain questions related to them. First of all, we have discussed argumentation and emotional intelligence, and Anam has mentioned subconscious and conscious thing. But you have you said that subconscious and conscious memory somehow affects our emotions. But this is not something which can be changed in a day or two. How can we delete all those suppressed or biased attitudes and be rational? What can you do this to us?
Well, this is it. I mean, this is almost as big in a way that's analogous to Anam's question earlier. It's huge, isn't it? It's absolutely huge. And so all the work around work around behavior change, if you like, I suppose, from if you like, getting a population of a country to accept a new policy or something as radical as sort of climate change policies, but also the work around psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy in particular, perhaps, but it would also dip into education as well, and the norms that we acquire in terms of beliefs, but also in terms of reflection, critical thinking, stuff that you guys are interested in that way, and how habituated we become to being self-critical in these respects. But it's, I mean, there's no simple answer to this, but what it does is at the very least make the question. This kind of research really does highlight how tricky we are as animals, as creatures. This dual process bit that we have, and the different needs that we have, and how they can be conflicting, and so on. It really does. The very, I mean, it can be frustrating being an academic or anyone who's trying to talk about stuff at times, because that is rarely enough to change minds in a significant way. There needs to be other things. A lot of it, another thing, Moa, is to do with, and again, your society is part of a process where presumably a culture changes, and and there's a thing called cultural cognition, the whole bit around social norms, where, and coming back to the point about cooperation that the last questioner raised as well, is if you want to challenge someone on their view, you come from a part of America that doesn't believe in global warming, the Bible Belt or whatever it might be, and you have an inkling that it might be right. Yeah, if you start to raise that conversation with people around you, there's a serious risk of losing friends, or certainly being ostracized to some extent. You're not going to take that risk. You're always going to, maintain your community before you're going to, if you like, start to try to introduce these kinds of changes. And as a result of that, you'll probably start not to think about it very much because it's uncomfortable to think about it. It'll cause cognitive dissonance. Your belief is not it doesn't mesh with the beliefs of the people that matter to you most. Therefore, it's better not to think about it, or just to change that belief, or become a climate change skeptic, or someone who is undecided, because it's much more convenient and much easier to do that. I'm got some degree of optimism that academics, a lot of time from social sciences and working in communication and behavior change, I think we're getting a better and better picture of how these things work, of what the components are, if you like. But that's still, but what that does illustrate is which is what your drives your question, is just how complicated this is to achieve. But it does, and we've got plenty of examples of it happening historically. Changes of views towards slavery, women's rights, and so forth. There's no shortage of to some extent, civil rights movement in America. We have seen big changes go on, and people's thinking shift over generations. One of the worries about climate change is we just don't have that long to do something about this. But we have seen, you see the youth, because of what's gone on in schools, and that's the sheer consistency of the message over the last 2 or 3 decades, of much greater awareness, and will be much more supportive of environmentally friendly policies than later generations would be. I don't know what kind of an answer that is, but hopefully that's of some use.
Yes, so it means that we have certain mob mentality in us. We find a relief when we have someone as thinking same as us.
Yeah, we're inherently social creatures. Yes. And part of what it is to be a social creature is to belong to a group, belong to a tribe, belong to a family, whatever it might be. And part of that is to share values and beliefs. And it's enormous. It's a bigger motivator as there is, in which case it has to be dealt with at a collective level, if you like, in that respect, I think.
That's I think, Marwa, you have your answer. And next we have another participant, Manal. She want to ask a question. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, Mr. Stewart.
Hello.
This is Manal. So basically, I really enjoyed your session, and it was very well informative. And according to my mindset, I'm very much into emotions and understanding the emotions of the other people and helping them out. So you talked about critical thinking and decision making and emotions. We have to consider our emotions when we are taking some decision. Some people are emotionally strong from the childhood. Some people get emotionally strong at their teenage, but something is in the nature. Some people are not emotionally strong. Some people are quick in their actions. Some people are very short-tempered. Some people are oversensitive by nature, and you cannot change the nature of someone. Am I right till here? We cannot change the nature of a person emotionally. So I just want to ask that you have gone through researches, you have written a book over critical thinking, and you have included emotions in that. So I would like to ask that how have you found this diversity? A person who can change himself according to emotions and according to experiences, with the passage of time, that's a different category. But a person who is naturally not strong enough, or he is naturally not able to change himself with the passage of time, or it's difficult for him. How have you found this thing in your research or while you were writing the book?
I understand the question. I understand the primary point you're making is wondering whether these individual differences in terms of our relationship to our emotions or our managing of them and so forth, how changeable that might be. I mean, it's not really the territory of the book it's kind of, there is an assumption with critical thinking that, at least in the mix, that being able to provide good arguments and being able to reflect more on our psychological biases and so forth will make us more, and I suppose, adaptable, more open to changing our minds, more able to change the minds of other people. I mean, the question you posed sounds almost like one you'd put to an experienced psychotherapist. How, in your experience, what success have you had? So if you're talking to a cognitive behavioral therapist who is using almost some ways critical thinking techniques to attempt to shift someone's traits and emotional intelligence, I suppose. And just what I know about that area is actually is reasonably successful in doing this. And what you'll find, I suppose, is a kind of a spectrum of, there'll be some people who maybe are able to make some pretty radical changes, but then there's others at the other end of the spectrum who can at least moderate their behavior. You know, what another thing I like about Epstein, the slightly sad feature is that his book, his 2014 book called The Experiential Self, I think, Cognitive Experiential Self Theory or something like that, will cost, even I'm deliberating whether I can afford to buy it. It's at least sort of £70 or something. But if your library's got it, or you've got a digital version of it, the last chapter is all about psychotherapy. And he's also interested in exactly what you raised about individual differences and the point that some people are just much more, I suppose, call it innately, or in terms of the way their personality is set up, much more oriented towards decision making based on the experiential mind, or they let that kind of guide their way through life. Some people are more towards the rational side. But as with all these things, it's going to be a matter of degree. And if it's a matter of degree, and we all possess both, we're not dogs, after all, we all possess both, in which case there should be some room for maneuver. But for me, this is what cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral coaching is precisely trying to do as well. And it seems to be fairly effective as well. But it's not strictly the business of critical thinking, because it's almost, but what you have to do, I think, with critical thinking, which is what I've tried to do here, is say, look, it's complicated, it's difficult to change minds in all sorts of ways, but providing good arguments, knowing about the ways in which people will resist arguments and that we resist arguments as well, will help in terms of being more tolerant, and also, crucially, the way you frame an argument, the peripheral stuff you put in to help people actually pay attention to what you're saying as well. Anyhow, so Epstein both has chapters on psychotherapy and on personality differences as well. So that will hopefully provide more kind of insight. And it's one of the things, again, it's quite a holistic book. You know, he hasn't written much. I think there's only 2 books out there, both written in quite old age. There's a huge amount of wisdom, huge amount of learning that's gone into what he's done. I'm getting some really big questions today, which is really nice.
You were talking about challenges, right? So I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So after saying that, I have another teacher, and she is also is waiting for her question. So, Ma'am Halima, you can ask the question, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Hello.
Yes, you are.
All right. So, Assalamu alaikum, dear all audience, and blessings upon you as well, Professor Stuart Hanscombe. First of all, instead of asking a question, I would like to add a comment here. I think understanding EI, emotional intelligence, is as crucial to understand as blood to body or oxygen to all living beings. And we are the most complex creation on this planet, I believe. But luckily, I think we got power and potential to tackle this intricacy. So understanding emotions would not only make us stable, but would also surely compel us to contribute a better verse in society, as you contributed. And I have to say, Professor, your verse is well constructed, and I'm really looking forward to read your book.
Oh,
Let's move towards the question. See, we have discussed and you have shed light upon it that rationality and emotions, they stand poles apart. Well, if not poles apart, at least they are different. So most of the time we are caught in a battle between emotions and rationality, between heart and brain. So in this battle, in such situations, tell me how to decide whether to go for emotional decision or rational one.
Well, yeah, I think there is kind of an answer there, but it is kind of the answer that is kind of embedded in a lot of what I said in that talk as well. That part of being emotionally intelligent, and that it comes from various abilities and possibly various, but definitely various traits as well, is knowing when to go with one or the other. And that will be, again, clearly context dependent, and will require a huge amount of experience as well, of being in the world, of being with yourself, of making decisions, of knowing the ways in which you can go wrong, or emotions can lead you right or lead you wrong. And so it's a very personal thing, in as much as you get to know yourself, if you like, and your various biases. And it was it Manal's question, or no, Merwa's question about different personality types as well, and understanding ourselves in these ways. And some of us are, I mean, I'm definitely in the category of, I could have the potential to live my entire life in the experiential system. And that's partly why I'm the right person to write these books. As well. I know where these flaws come from. I know how they can be problematic, but I also know how they can lead to a huge amount of enjoyment of life as well. When I talk about in the chapter on dispositions, that what I've got in there at the moment is one called flexibility, which I might take out, and just because it's one of my students came up with quite a good criticism of why it's probably not a separate one from open-mindedness. But whatever I do with it, one thing I talk about there is just what you said, is that the good critical thinker is not always in the rational mind or the rational system mode. That's not going to be any fun at all. And there is intelligence and there is enjoyment to be obviously from the experiential system. That is where we spend most of our time as well. No one's suggesting that should change, but it's about the wisdom that allows you to know, okay, here's a situation in which I need to be wary of the experiential mind and how it could bias proceedings. Here's a situation in which I can let go. So I would see that, I do agree that that's an important trait or an important disposition. Beyond saying that it comes from experience and self-knowledge and so many of the other things that I've said today, I'm not sure what else I can add, I'm afraid.
I think you have answers two of the questions at the same time. And because in chat box, I have also read Madiha's question, that she's thinking that do we have to overcome these emotions? Like, I think so, being a rationalist makes you isolate sometimes. So she really wants your perspective on this.
So in other words, being less influenced by emotion, more influenced by deliberation, rational thing, the rational system, means requires a withdrawal from other people. Is that what the question means?
Yes, she wants that. Do we really need to be rationalist?
Well, certainly, no, you're right. As much as my answer to the last question is, well, God,
yes.
No. What a drag. So
you really motivated everyone here to, ask the questions.
It's very much about knowing when to be in one or the other. We can never, I don't think there's any way of ever not being operating in the experiential system. Experiential system can be intelligent in all sorts of ways as well. It's got a wealth of inductive knowledge, you know, it often helps us make the right decision. Think about what we do in a day, from the routine of getting up and having breakfast and getting ready to go out, driving to work or whatever you do, cycling to work. It's all done very automatically and intelligently, and there's all sorts of things that are being processed in this way. So there's no getting around that, and it's incredibly useful. And what it can do, of course, is free up the rational mind for thinking about new problems, taking on new challenges and just you know. So you know that the isolation bit is interesting. I mean God, it's a whole other area. Is there no area of depth we're not discussing today, because it's such a good one as well. That spending time alone strikes me as really important for a whole range of reasons. But we are also inherently social creatures, and I'm certainly of the view that if we're going to have our mind changed, it's often dialogue. It's often those constructive conversations with people that we respect, who are critical friends, who we agree with maybe in lots of ways, but they say, on this one, I'm not with you, and here's why. And because of your relationship with them, you'll listen. Those are moments in which you could have your mind changed about something or other.
Yes, I agree. Let's move to another query. This will be the last one, I promise. And we have another teacher, Ma'am Nosheen. She wants to ask a question. Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay, Mr. Stewart, I just want to say that it was very, very interesting and very motivated kind of speech that you have given. I won't say that it was a talk, it was a speech, proper speech that you have given. When I was listening to you, I was thinking that it seems as I have almost wasted my life because I didn't know that we have to control our emotions. We have been, trained like this, that if you are in an argument, like I am not blaming anybody, but I'm just sharing my experience, that we have been trained like this, that if you are in any argument, you have to be very, very emotional. Emotionally, you have to involve yourself in that argument. And if you stay unemotional, then it simply means that you are kind of losing your argument. So my question here is that how can we train our next generation? At what age we should train them that they need to have this emotional intelligence? Because I have now got this idea that this is the key to success in your professional life, in your practical life, in your in your academic life. You can be successful if you know how to intelligently control your emotions. So question is that at what age we can train them? At what age can we tell them that you need to control your emotions?
That's a really good question. I don't have an answer to it because I'm not an educationist. I educate adults and 18-year-olds sort of thing. So but there will be answers to this. But it's a really good point, because I mean, yes, you would imagine that something, because coming back to this issue of cultural norms as well, that if you that is fascinating. So if you become less emotional, it's a sign that you're kind of giving up or that you're losing in some way. But presumably the presence of high emotions in it makes it less likely that people are you're not very good at listening when you're in an emotional state, for a start, are you? So it's there's going to be lots of drawbacks from that kind of norm. So what do you do about it? Yeah, I mean, I couldn't possibly give you a specific answer. I don't know, but I bet there are some answers out there to do with, isn't it? It's about when you have a discussion within the classroom, what's acceptable and what's not. What's the most productive way of this thing going on? And of course, as you know, with so much learning, if you've got that going on in front of you, and two kids start to get emotional, say, well, what's just happened there? And here's how that's not very productive. If you can remain calm, and also remain calm does not mean that you're losing or that you've given up on you don't care about what you're talking about. It just means that you are, maybe it's sort of reframing of it, isn't it? Instead of, this is not a competition. We're looking for truth, or we're looking for agreement, or we're looking for answers here that could be, we could generate between us, or I might be closer to the truth than you, but whatever the case is, let's and this is one of the first disposition that I talk about is love of truth, or commitment to truth, rather than to winning. or to being, an issue of status and so forth. I don't know if that would be in the mix, but I can see how a set of norms would need to be changed. But sorry, I can't give you a more specific
Okay, well,
answer. It's a really good point. So.
I guess you have given me a hint now. I can tell my students to be calm, and being calm doesn't mean that they are losing something. Okay, good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
So that being said, I mean, thank you, Mr. Stewart. I really mean it. And thank you for solving all the puzzles from my audience and from my panelists as well. And it's going to be all from my side. Before saying goodbye to you, I would like if you have any conclusion remarks, and then we will move towards the vote of thanks from Ms. Doha.
No particular concluding remarks, but thank you. This has been really, really enjoyable. It's been really nice to be able to, if you like, present my work in progress, get your feedback. Anam, thank you so much for your wonderful chairing of this as well. That's been really good. And every question has been interesting. Brilliant. I mean, we are talking about the same thing. And I clearly have a broad range of interests and that will feed into the critical thinking thing. Your questions have touched on these things so wonderfully as well, that it's been a really enjoyable session. So thank you to all of you. Thanks for inviting me and for that's much appreciated.
Thank you, sir. I'm now thinking to add it on my CV as well. I'm gonna quote your name, like you're author of a book, and this happened. So moving to the next, and it's from my side, and now I will invite Ms. Doha. She's a member of PAS, and she has something to say on the vote of confidence. She's going to praise. Yes, Ms. Doha, please. You can unmute yourself. Yes.
Hello, sir. Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
This is Doha Face. Thank you so much, sir, for giving such an informative session in a very amazing way. On behalf of PAS, I would like to thank you as well. We, as a student, were really in need of such talk. I'm so grateful to you for educating us about other on the same time. We all will really like to see you again as well. Thank you so much for being there.
Oh, I'd be delighted. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention, thank you, Faz. And Rashid, thank you to you as well for setting this up and all the gracious email interchanges as well, and for accommodating my postponement too. So thanks for all your efforts there.
All right, I think that's it. And have a nice day.
Yeah, you guys as well. Take care.
Goodbye.